Well, we're talking about movies this morning because of a fascinating book we got hold of a couple of weeks ago called Movie Therapy and How It Changes Lives. And I'm delighted to welcome to the studio psychotherapist and the author of the book, Movie Therapy, Bernie Wooder. Good morning,
Hello.
Bernie.
Good morning.
Now, we've been talking about people's favourite films, and I think there's a difference, I suppose, between the films that we know and love because they're great films, and some films that speak more individually to people, and there might be reasons for that. And in your book, there's one film in particular, and I remember seeing it, and it was all right, not great, but Bridges of Madison County.
Yeah.
And one of your patients, that really meant a lot to.
Well, she realised in watching that film where the lead actress has to make the choice between a very dependable husband and this romantic stranger, played by Clint Eastwood. And
The kind of
Meryl
brief
Streep.
encounter choice that she has to make in that film.
She's very similar. And it's such a difficult choice. And as my client was watching that, she started to cry, and she said, you know, I said, well, why are you crying? And she said, I'm not quite sure. And then I said, well, does it connect anyway with your own life? Have you felt like the character felt? And she thought for a moment, and then she started to sob, and she said, yes, I have.
But she hadn't acknowledged it to herself until watching the film.
And asked, but till she was asked, actually, because it had to be coaxed, because it was unconscious. And I said to her, well, do you know what it is? And she said, it's just come to me. She said, I realised the only man I'd ever really loved, I'd let slip through my fingers.
Oh dear, sounds like a movie itself.
Yeah. And moments like that, it brings what is unconscious and unhappy often to the surface. It acts like a magnet, as a catalyst, to bring up what's necessary to be dealt with.
And would you watch these films with your clients, or do they bring these thoughts to you in the process of normal therapy?
Predominantly, they bring them to me. I very seldom prescribe, although I do sometimes, when I really know a client, and I've been with them sometimes. But I want them to bring something that's moved them, whatever's moved them, whether it be to anger, whether it be to joy, whether it be to sadness. Once I ask them about what is it about that, is it the scene or is it the issues? And they might say, well, there was a scene where she's at the station, she waits for the train, looks for her dad to come off, and he doesn't get off. And the disappointment of that. And I'd say, well, how is she feeling? Bitterly disappointed. And then they get upset. And I say, I wonder if that connects that feeling anywhere in your life. And it's a way in. And then suddenly you get, yes, I had that many times, you know.
And does that in any way, when people go back to that film, if they understand what speaks to them, does it almost spoil it for them in any way? Because they're understanding the emotion. You know,
No.
when I watch a film, I mean, I cry very easily at movies.
Sure.
And I like that feeling of it, you know, taking me over completely.
Sure.
And if I sometimes I sit and watch a film that doesn't draw me in, I say, oh yeah, they've cut there, oh, that's the cherry picker shot, and you kind of unpick it in a different way, and it
Sure.
spoils my enjoyment of it.
Sure. But this is very different. This is an insight that's coming to you about your own life. And when it comes to you and you exorcise, then it's clear. But often a person will see the same film again, and that will touch them in another way. For example, this wasn't a client. I was invited to a monastery to have a meal, and I was introduced, was at this table, an old priest there, and I said to him, I'm a movie therapist, and he asked me what that was about. So I tentatively said to him, well, you know, it's the things that films can touch people very deeply and speed up the course of therapy. Anyway, what happened was, he said, I can concur with that. He's about 68. So I said, why? And he said, well, it was a film that made me realise something very important that changed my life. And I said, what was it? He said, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In watching that film, he said, I realised by watching Jack Nicholson, he said, how much I'd been institutionalised. And with that, he said, I took a gap year, went off around the world. He said, which really taught me a great deal as well. But the interesting thing was, I asked him in reference, could he, as we got to know one another, watch that film again? And he did. And he got much more upset about Billy Bibbit, who had the sexual problems.
Yes.
Because it, again, mirrored his own experience. So that film was incredibly fruitful for that man's life.
Isn't it incredible? Listening to you, and I've said this to Paul before, I remember reading somewhere that the most childlike we ever become is when we're watching films. And it's really interesting to do this in the cinemas. As you're watching, just turn and look along the rows. And everyone, the expression on an adult's face is the most childlike it will ever be, because you are being taken with this, but literally, you you're just being led like a child that's got a blank sheet of paper, because they have very little experience, and all our experience falls away from our faces, and we sit there in the most childlike stance, apparently, that you will ever see an adult. So, and that explains why then it can get into our heads. We allow it in.
You've got it in one, because the defences are down. And we have to suspend in watching a film, any film, disbelief. Because we know we're not in space. We know we're not in a space. But we suspend that disbelief to absolute vulnerability. Very good observation.
Isn't that amazing? Because we're all, especially Paul and myself, we're quite bitter, damaged people.
Speak for yourself.
But as adults, we are
prepared. well-adjusted, successful, and in a stable relationship.
But we're prepared to allow ourselves to become children again. And all of it, anyone that watches films is prepared to allow ourselves to become
like the
childlike.
great line in The Wild Bunch, and they're looking at the outlaws playing with the kids, and the old man in the village says, all of us want to become children again. The worst of us most of all, because you think you can go back and change your life.
Yeah. Sure, but it is the total letting go, the total relaxation of no responsibility, no problems, sucked into another life, stirring your emotions, but often it can stir emotions from the past.
Yes.
So I've had some fascinating stories, really. There was a woman who came to see me who was, she felt second best. And one of the few times I recommended a film, and I said to her, I want you to go and see Rebecca, the original one.
Oh, of course, the Hitchcock one.
Yeah.
With the second Mrs.
De Winter.
Yes.
And what happened was, she went to see it, and she'd been having problems all round, and I asked her, did it affect her? And she said it really did. And I said, what affected? And I was surprised. She said it was Mrs. Danvers.
Oh, the housekeeper.
Yeah, and
scary lady.
I thought she would be hit by the self-esteem issue, but she wasn't. And I said, what was it about? And she said, her look. And I said, what do you think she feels like when she watches that woman look at her, Mrs. De Winter? How does she feel? And she said, I think she feels intimidated and humiliated and undermined. With that, I said, does that touch your life at all? And she said, yes. It was her mother and her mother-in-law. They had that same very penetrating
and
look,
constantly judging her,
and it was just that
never
critical
quite good enough,
look.
yes.
Exactly. And I said, well, we have to look at this. When we looked at it, she said, I can never tell my husband this. And I said, why? And she said, because every time I've tried to talk about how his mum is with me, he defends her. So I said, well, I want you both to go and see the film together. You're not sitting confrontationally, it's very important, as you know. You're sitting side by side. When it gets to that bit, which really gets you, I want you to turn to your husband and say, how do you think this woman feels in this film? And because his defences were down, and because he was childlike, he said, I think she feels really uncomfortable, really awful. She's made me angry. And she said, well, that's how your mum makes me feel. And he got it without arguing. So it's another way of helping people communicate where it's been difficult to communicate before. I've found a multiplicity of ways over the years. Role models, for example, are very interesting. When it comes to role models, halfway through therapy, we might go in what would you call a phase of coaching, where they've got rid of whatever the problem is. Now they want to move on to what they want now. When they pick a role model, they very seldom pick the star. They'll pick supporting cast.
That is fascinating, though, isn't it? They go for somebody who's,
they don't go for someone who's outlandish. They go for a supporter. Yeah. And, I've just had such amazing stories from people,
did you hear what Paul was saying? Because it hit a nerve with me when he's saying that we all love travelling movies, the Thelma and Louises, the ones that leave an environment and go on.
Because I suppose we're discovering a new area with the characters, so you identify anything that's new to them. That's why I do like, although Joe's not seen them, the very first Harry Potter film, the first Harry Potter book are great because we learn about the world of magic along with Harry. We're making that journey with them. After that, they get a bit samey.
Sure.
But it's that first, the shock of the new hits us as an audience as well as the characters.
But what was really interesting about the Harry Potter film was the clients that spoke to me about it talked about identifying with Harry being locked under the stairs.
Oh dear.
Nothing else.
I mean, cut off from affection and family life.
That came from being locked under. They could identify with that.
Now, you were talking about lots of people identify with the lesser characters. This flies in the face of that, just briefly. This is from Jenna, who says, Joe, Paul and Bernie, I identify with Private Benjamin, that is Private Judy Benjamin, as played by Goldie Hawn. I was in a job where my nickname was Private Benjamin. I managed to grow up in my formative years and take on a very hard and difficult profession. I had a background which afforded me a good life, and I didn't know what had hit me when I started my job being so young. I saw the worst side of life, and I've dealt with really difficult situations. I suppose, I mean, in reverse, Bernie, your experience could really help directors, couldn't it? Or,
yes.
You know, to say, you know, you may think that we're going for the plot, but we're not. We're actually going for the characters.
It's very interesting you say that, because I get lots of media students come and interview me, as well as people studying psychotherapy, and I'm open to that. They can send me their emails and their questions, and I'm very open to that, because I like to see the idea of it spreading. But you get, how can I say, in terms of, let's say, a surprise, Brokeback Mountain, I had a woman say to me that she was so touched by that film because she'd never known the intimacy with her husband that those two men had known emotionally. Wow. And, you know, it's like it doesn't come at you from the day. Another woman, very streetwise woman, said to me that what she really was affected by was Bruno. And you can never tell. And I thought, Bruno, you know?
What, you mean the film, the Sacha Baron Cohen film, Bruno?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I haven't seen, actually.
And how did that hit her?
Well, how it hit her was that she said, when he chats up the rednecks, she said that is exactly the feeling women get every day when you get sort of arrogant, ignorant people trying to chat them up who have no idea.
Being hit on, almost the sexual predators.
Yeah. And she said they had the chance to feel that, and she said she thought it captured it beautifully. I'd have never put those two together.
The book's called Movie Therapy. It's by Bernie Wooder, UKCP, and it's got a foreword, a very moving foreword, by Sir David Putnam.
Yeah.
Of course, who writes, he's been involved in some amazing films like The Mission and Chariots of Fire, and he picks a very unusual film, and he talks about the impact The Sixth Sense, which is a great film, brilliant film by M. Night Shyamalan with Bruce Willis, it has on him. And it's the scene right near the end, isn't it, where I think the boy's mum...
They're in the car. ...realises
the boy can communicate with the dead,
yeah.
and asks and the little boy asks her a question and gives her an answer.
Yeah, he said he couldn't grieve. He said, and he really wished he could, because it's an important moment with his dad.
Because his father passed away just around the time
before he got the award.
Yeah.
And he said, because... the woman said, I always ask my mum a question and I'd love to know the answer. And the little boy looks to the right and he sees the nan there, and she just nods and says, yes, that's the answer. So he turns round and she said yes.
Every single day?
Every single day, yes. Yeah, what was the question? She said, I just wanted to know whether she was proud of me. And David Putnam said, that's exactly what got me.
Yeah.
I started my grieving from then on. And he was very nice. He said I could print his... speech about that, because I was overjoyed when I saw that, because it verified all my experience.
And that would have been years and years after his father's demise. 10, 20 years after the father died.
Yeah.
So, Bernie, would this translate to theatre productions as well? Or
Absolutely.
Do you think it does?
Absolutely. And music. I mustn't forget music, because theatre are moving you in the same way.
Yeah.
It's only the medium that's different, but the stories, our lives are up there, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, you get a film, you get a play, you've got the the talent of the writers, you've got the talent of the actors, you've got the music if there's there, and you've got the director orchestrating all of that to emotional depth.
Yeah.
And high.
You see, listen, I hate to say this, and Paul will get cross with me, because I go on and on about Big Brother, but one of the things Big Brother... Well, because it removes all that. I say, if they play music in the Big Brother house, they all go mad immediately. They don't have books, they don't have television, they don't have theatre, they have nothing. So all that fantasy... all that therapy is removed from them.
Sure.
So, you know, there is a place for Big Brother, isn't there?
I think it's I think it's a great character study of what happens to people when all that's been taken away. And, I mean, I thought Marcus was a brilliant character.
Yes.
He had the highest IQ in there, by the way. Very, very interesting character. I think he'll probably have a career. Yeah, I mean, I love... let me tell you about a story. There was another woman couldn't grieve, and she had been... she came from an orphanage. She never knew her real father. And when she was about 60, she found him, her real blood father. And for about 3 years, they had a real relationship, which was fantastic for her. But what happened was, he died. So all the defence mechanism of the previous 60 years with the stepfather all came into play. But she couldn't grieve at all. She just closed right up to protect herself from what a bitter disappointment to find afterwards. And what happened was, she was in Hong Kong, and she went to see Platoon. And of course, the music, Barger's Adagio, and immediately in the cinema, it got her. But it was predominantly the music that started the tears, and then she linked it to the sadness. It touched that sadness in such a marvellous way.
Thank you very much for joining us, Bernie Wood of the Books Movie Therapy.